I think I covered that part. What I want to do is sort of like give you my sort of a collection of ideas to sort of limit the scope of my philosophy as an ink maker and artist. I put artist in quotation marks, as you will understand further down the road my views on what an artist is and things like that. So, yes. People want to know often why I make ink, or how, I thought that would be a profession at all, because ink is one of those ubiquitous substances that's practically free, that you can get at a bank, or anywhere there's a ballpoint pen. But that's sort of like one of the magical things about ink for me, is that it is ubiquitous and exists everywhere, yet also is used in some of the most significant parts of our lives. We sign things away, whole houses, lives, all these things are conveyed on ink. It's one of those things that's just, it's like one of those, it's a magic that is just, it's hidden by its very ubiquity. I always think of it as a sort of a strange hidden ether that things travel in. Anyway, so yeah, I was working as a waiter, and I was like 30 years old, right? And it was terrible. I was like waiting tables. I was the oldest person there. Everyone else was like 15-year-old girls, and it was in a small southern town. And of course, I couldn't make any money, and they were getting all the money because their parents all went to the same church and stuff. And I was obviously a failure at life because I was 30 years old waiting a table. So I was punished for that reason. And I was like, I'm quitting this job. Because I was like, this is not me, this is not what I want. And how I came into making ink, I was like, okay, enough. I'm going to rely on just what I have, and I'm going to figure out a way to just, do this. It was a way of autonomy for me. I was like, I'm going to draw. I'm going to be an illustrator. That's what I'll do. And I was like, so into this autonomous mode, I was like, I'm going to even make my own ink. I'm going to figure all this out. So I started making my own ink. And I also illustrated terrible children's books with a vanity press out of Richmond. I do not recommend any of you, if you have any respect for me, to look them up because they're awful. But it was a very fun experience. Come on in. And I have this sort of like, I can be a little bit tenacious with my research, a little bit obsessive, some might say. So when I was making my ink, of course, I wanted to know everything about the history of ink. So I took a deep delve into it. So the kind of ink I make is would be known as an iron gall ink, which is a very old ink, been in use for easily a millennia, perhaps longer. It is it's ubiquitous in like the Western world. Eastern, like China, India, it was more of a carbon-based ink, and also carbon-based inks existed in the Western world as well. But it's definitely like very prevalent in like, Da Vinci's sketches. Bach did his music in it. The Declaration of Independence written in it. It's like it was the common ink of 900 years or more. And it's it only recently sort of came out of fashion around the turn of the 1900s with the rise of coal-based pigments. You're like, where's the exciting part coming out? Anyway, so coal-based pigments sort of like phased it out. But up to that point, it was the common ink. When you spoke of ink in the Western, especially Christian world, it was like this was the ink. So the components of this ink are iron sulfate. This is iron sulfate. It's green. It's pretty. a tannin source. Now I don't use galls because I like the little wasps. Little wasps make the galls, and they have this beautiful life cycle that is just really wild and strange. And I'd rather not risk their little world. So what I make it out of is sumac, which is very prevalent all over the place and very tannic rich. This is how I bundle it up. Bundling it up sort of increases the amount of fermentation within it. It sort of breaks down some of the chemicals to where it becomes more, so it's a gallotannate compound, so like it sort of divides gallic and the tannic acid, and the gallic gives you a deeper black. But anyway, this is sort of how I store it. And a binder, which is more often than not gum arabic, gum acacia, used as a food additive in Mountain Dew, and I think Nico wafers. So yeah, it's a great binder. I love it. And you can eat it, of course. So these are the constituents of ink. So like there was all for a long period of time. Well, I mean, of course, this has like been used for like centuries, in monastery, originating, like sort of being traded back and forth. Recipes were traded back and forth in monasteries where a lot of the writing was going on during the dark ages of Europe. But like sort of as like it became, more commonly used, and like people were writing all over the Western world, there was some attempts to standardize formulation, but for the most part, it was something that was sort of recorded in recipe books alongside of like food and things like that, and it was sort of handed down through different generations, as well as like shared with friends. And a few of these like more famous recipes like are still accessible to us today. Like there's a Isaac Newton's recipe is available. It's floating out there. Jane Austen's a very popular one among people who like to make ink. They love doing the Jane Austen recipe. I don't know why. It involves. I mean, it's not. I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of the ink recipe. I have nothing against Jane Austen, but I'm not a fan of the ink recipe. Just to be clear, I love Jane Austen. She's great.
That's good.
Yeah. I kind of love the idea of like everyone having these personalized inks, like everyone has their own recipe and all that stuff. There's just like a lot of really neat, but there's also this like sort of interesting history, like where the French in the 1700s were moving to establish an institutionalized ink, and they hired this fellow, Guillot, I think his name was Guillot, and he made this ink, and it was kept like completely like secret and stuff. But then someone leaked it, leaked the recipe, and it started like like these knockoffs were sort of like flying around, and it was called l'encre de la petite vertu, the ink of the little virtue, and it was sold on like the bridges, anyway, I thought it was a fun little exciting thing, a little ink scandal. Yes. So this ink has been used for a while. The ingredient that I find really, that speaks to me the most is iron sulfate. In my readings about ink making, iron sulfate was one of those things that was sort of this mysterious, well-known ancient substance that was like a staple in the alchemists' cupboard. It was like very much like it was used in a lot of different experiments. It was known also as green vitriol, and so the vitriol that we think of today, when we say vitriol, we're thinking like caustic, something that eats something like acidic. What that really comes from is oil of vitriol, which is made by roasting iron sulfate or any vitriol and releasing sulfuric acid fumes and then distilling them into another thing. That is oil of vitriol. Oil of vitriol sort of and then vitriol sort of become like synonymous. But etymologically speaking, vitriol, the word, is related to vitrine, vitreous, in vitro, which is to mean glass-like, because it's sort of like a glass, the crystals are sort of like have a glassy sheen. So that's a little etymological distinction there. So yes, how are y'all doing out there? Very good.
Yes, I love this book report.
Okay, good, yay. You have a question?
Is it mined or somehow manufactured?
For the most part, it was mined. It was actually one of those things. It was a product of mining and leaching when like iron ores were exposed, specifically pyrite. Fool's gold, when it was exposed to the atmosphere, it would sort of create this green corrosion that became iron sulfate and was used in different things. Interesting name for this substance is the powder of sympathy. And it had this reputation as a medical substance for affecting healing at a distance. And it was achieved by, say, if you stab somebody, and then you take the powder of sympathy and you soaked a rag in it and you rubbed the weapon, it would affect a healing process in the person who was stabbed. So it was sort of like a way of like healing at a distance, and hence the term sympathy, because sympathetic means sort of like, you know, things sort of transferred between substances. There's an interesting moment in when people were trying to figure out maritime navigation, when they needed clocks on board the ship in order to, like, you know, figure out how stars relate and, like, you know, where people were going and things like that. They were trying to solve that, and a quack suggested using the powder of sympathy. He was said, like, if you stab a dog and you put the dog on board, at noon, I will rub the knife with powder of sympathy so everyone on board the ship will know that it's noon, and you can then determine your, you know, your angles from there. There's no proof that that experiment was attempted. I'm hoping that it wasn't for the dog's sake, but it's an interesting little tidbit. And also, I will go back to the idea of powder of sympathy and sympathetic healing, and that sort of like that sort of homeopathic philosophy later on. I will return to that. Thanks y'all for listening to me ramble. So what made iron gall ink, gallotanate of iron ink, common ink, sort of a revolutionary information technology is its indelibility. So what happens with this ink is when it's laid on the paper, well, first of all, in the bottle, the gallotanate of iron molecule is colorless and soluble. When it's laid on paper and exposed to atmospheric oxygen, it becomes a dark, insoluble compound. And when that happens, it soaks into the paper, creating these dark crystals that then embed themselves into the fiber and making them mechanically unremovable from the substrate of paper or parchment. Now, that would make it indelible, so you couldn't wash it off. It's really technically stained or dyed the paper. So I think that's really cool. And it may seem trivial today, like that was a big deal, but when you think about like the importance of documents, of signatures, of manuscripts, and where they had to go, like if they were traveling, like they had to be on a boat, you know, they would be soaked by sea spray, or like in a rainy situation, like the entire, you know, things could be lost easily. So it was kind of a big deal. Utility aside, I find that the quality is fascinating because it's this chemical mechanism between iron and oxygen that is very much like what carries oxygen in our bloodstream. Iron and oxygen's relationship has this interesting thing where they need each other, but they can sort of let each other go, and it operates as a good transport. And it's even kind of, it's poetic in that, like, ink and blood sort of work in the same way. In fact, if you smell ink, iron gall ink, it smells remarkably like blood because of the iron ions, which is kind of disturbingly beautiful. But so when you think about that, you think about blood as an organ, and ink is sort of like an organ too. It's like it's an organ that functions outside of our bodies. It's a constructive organ. Ink breathes. You know, it's a simulacrum of the animus. it like inhales and then like just dies on the paper to preserve memories. And it's an extension. Ink is a fluid. Ink is a fluid, an extension of our body that we use to create external memory in the material world. So think about that. I'll just digest that for a minute. I'm gonna have a little bit of tea.
Little fluid.
A little fluid to replenish my inner ink stream. So the idea of iron, so this is me in my research when I'm doing ink making. I sort of like go way deep. Iron being like that sort of that critical component in like the whole ink making. I sort of got more and more into iron, and I'm gonna get a little bit more dilated into the cosmos and into like history and mythos here, because iron has a really interesting place in our universe. So in the realm of like classical myth, especially Hellenistic and like planetary associations, iron's really heavily associated with Mars, with male energy, with war, with sort of not the greatest stuff, like a lot of like bad things. But I feel like that's a bit of an impoverished view, and it falls flat to me, especially given what we now know in like terms of elements, and like especially where iron exists in like the formation of the universe. Iron it's a liminal element. A liminal element. It's a liminal in that there's a line, because iron's the death of stars. Iron is like the turning point in stars, where stars start to die. Because in the nuclear fusion process, iron is the first element where it takes more energy to fuse it than it releases. So if y'all know how nuclear fusion works, it's like hydrogen, boom, comes together, it's helium, lots of energy released. It goes up and up, and as it goes up, it sort of loses more energy as it's like being, as the fusion happens. It's at iron's point when it's like it's taking more energy. So it's the point of entropy in the star. So it's like it's middle age, and then it goes down from there. And then the star dies. So when you think about that, it's sort of like, wow, iron is like sort of kind of like amazing. But it's sort of like terrifying and dire, because it's like, wow, it's the destroyer of light and stars and all this other stuff. But like, if stars never died, there wouldn't be any planets or anything, or like people, life, or any of that stuff. And especially in the terms of life, like we have iron that is responsible for, like, scientists and like, people say like, oh, we should look for water on Earth, or water on other planets, and oxygen and stuff. But in order for those things to even exist, there needs to be a magnetic field around the planet. And the magnetic field around our planet, of course, is generated by an iron core, a dynamo that's turning inside of the planet, that's generating this magnetic field. It's keeping the sun, solar winds from stripping off our oceans and our atmosphere. So iron not only like it created the materials, or allowed for the materials of the sun and stars to burst forth into the universe, but it also is creating this very special, like almost like an alembic, like over this is the sun, and like the magnetic field's created this sort of like field that keeps the rays from blowing off, and it sort of extends out into this thing that, known as the magnetotail. And this is really cool. So, whenever is a full moon, the plants are conspiring to paint it red. I want you to think about that. So what's happening here is there's the planet Earth, full of oxygen and life. Oxygen can only exist when there's photosynthesis, in free form in an atmosphere, when there's photosynthesis going on. So when the sun is hitting the Earth, the solar winds are blowing the very tops of oxygen off the surface of the atmosphere, and it's going along the magnetotail, and it's hitting the moon. That oxygen is hitting the iron particles that are on the moon and painting the moon red around the poles. There's rust deposits developing on the poles of the moon because of oxygen in the atmosphere. So it's like the plants are actively changing the color and content of the moon. And it only happens on a full moon because the moon is only on that side when it's full. So it's only on the full. So next time when you see a full moon, you just imagine like all this air that's going up there and like eventually giving a soft red blush to the moon. I mean, I think that's cool, and I went a little tangential there, but bringing it back. So yeah, nuclear fusion, entropy point, da 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 da, existential terror. So given these things, like, okay, well, we now thinking about it in like in terms like, to me now iron isn't about like war and like penises and all that stuff. It's like about like iron is like I think of it as like a death mother. Like it destroys something in order to create something, and it's sort of like in this in my mythos, it's like this thing that like it's destroyed in order to create figure, and it has almost like this. It's almost like this weird like Luciferian like sort of like plummet from like solar nuclear paradise into like the material world, and then the material world is like developed by iron. Yeah, so this is like sort of like my little trip out on iron as an element. Okay, so there's other modern and mystical like sort of interpretations of iron from the Anthroposophist school of thought. Anthroposophy. I don't ever know if I'm saying it right.
Anthroposophy. Anthroposophy.
Anthroposophy. Thank you. So like it was a school of thought. Rudolf Steiner sort of like was one of the guys. It's a far from perfect mode, but I enjoyed what I think is important about it was it tried to connect spiritual significance to the goings on of science, like seeing like the animus in things, seeing like the supernatural and the natural, and bridging that connection, which I think is like very important. But one of Steiner's disciples, another Mr. Rudolf Hauska, he wrote a book called The Nature of Substance, and he would explore all these elements through like this sort of mystical lens, and he ascribed to iron this the quality of come on in. He ascribed to iron this quality of drawing the cosmic ethereal into the sphere of gravity. And that I find to be particularly, compelling in the idea that like not only does that sort of apply to like the huge cosmic scale of like iron's role in the world where like it creates like infusible matter that then sort of like falls from the star and becomes like an earthy thing, like it becomes sort of like its own like sort of gravitational thing, but also in the very act of writing. Because it's like you're pulling your ideas and your thoughts from the ether and you're giving them the weight of the word. So there's like this interesting parallel between what happens in the chemical reaction of iron, iron gall ink, and like what happens in nuclear fusion in stars. At least I was drawing those connections. So yeah, that's sort of my little mystified, views about iron. So I'm gonna hopefully tie all this up in here soon. How are y'all doing? Everyone doing okay? Okay.
You're like the science teacher I always wanted but never had.
So you may have noticed my research led me down a like pretty intense rabbit hole of reading, but finding this underlying thread of magic. I sort of like it just sort of like made me think, and appreciate more the power of material, and how it can lend itself and even inform art that you make with it. Like there's more, it has more integrity. Like when you know what something's made out of. Like if you're painting something, say I don't know, you're painting something about like the working class and the struggles and stuff, and you're using all these colors and things, and then but what if all those colors are like, they're being made in like some sort of terrible factory where like, there's working people there that are suffering because of the fumes. It sort of underlies the whole point of your art, doesn't it? So I like to think about like, what I put in what I'm making and like what materials, like, do I want to have in my creations. So there's a movement among pigment practitioners and artists about materially informed mediums. And it's been a pushback against sort of like the anonymity of art materials, since we don't know what they're made out of, petroleum products and all this other stuff. And it's like I say, it's something that like, gives integrity and power to the work when you know where things are. And not only that, it fosters a connection to the land, to the plants, to the animals that you're interacting with, even animals that are some dianimal pigment animals. But it fosters that connection, which sort of strengthens your work. So it was in that spirit that I sought to harness the power of the materially informed pigment. And I decided to, rather than foster connections, I decided to use guns. So this is a gun that it was a Smith & Wesson 38 police issue from it might have been World War II era, possibly. This actually was a perfectly, functioning gun earlier this year. I've been dissolving it in sulfuric acid to obtain vitriol, green vitriol. So this stuff, in other words. And it makes sense. I mean, guns symbolically are not about connection or relationship or dialogue. Guns symbolically are detrimental to all those things. Guns represent a consolidation of power and control and willful domination. Like you see in all the movies, I have a gun, it's like having a microphone. It's like I'm in control. It's these things. It's not about facilitating any sort of like connection or anything nurturing. It's always about just consolidation of power. In fact, like the only thing that might even sort of like seem like it is just the dialogue of guns is like the idea of like the arms race. It's like, well, I have a gun, well, I have like a bigger gun. Well, I have two really big guns, and I have all these other big guns. The thing is like no one wins an arms race. It's never winnable. It's just a constant escalation of fear and grief. I don't know how much I really need to say about guns, about the grief and fear, the dead children and the despairing people that, they hurt all the time. I hear artists use phrases like, I want to start a dialogue, or I want to raise awareness. And it irks me sometimes because as far as guns go, there's plenty of dialogue out there, and there's plenty of awareness. We all are very aware of it, and people are talking about it plenty, but there's not really action. And the idea is, I want to do something that is action. I don't want to do something that's going to start or raise awareness or whatever. So I do. So this is what I do. I make ink out of guns. It's sort of like where direct action intersects with practical magic and sympathetic medicine. It's where all these things come together, and it's where I feel I can actually operate with some sense of integrity in making anything at all. That's sort of where I ended up coming to. I was making ink before I was making guns, by the way. I wasn't like doing all this like intense research, not drawing or anything. I wasn't in like some little hermitage where I was like studying all this stuff. I was drawing terrible children's books, as I mentioned before. Ink is not, an innocent thing. And ink is in fact, one of the most weaponized substances in the world, like a papal bull, a legal writ, a warrant. These things are instruments of destruction, and they're totally used like that. But ink is at least more adaptable as a substance. You can write a poem, you can draw a picture. Ink can do many things. Guns can do one thing. So I like to think about that, and it's at least more of an egalitarian tool that could be a weapon or something beautiful. Yeah. So, and there's so much like, so it's also about like material redemption. Like, iron as the creative creature, iron as like, this sort of like thing that like, spurned the nuclear heaven and became like the material rock, cold-cooled, life-infested world. Like sort of like honoring like the element as like sort of like this, creative creature, rather than just sort of like putting it to cold steel that is then used to draw blood. Then there's so much creative spirit in iron. There's like, once I started doing the ink stuff, I started exploring other pigments that are iron-based pigments. And of course these iron-based pigments are known as Mars pigments, Mars black, Mars red, Mars yellow. If you guys are painters, you probably know the names of the colors. And of course they're called Mars colors because of the association with Mars and iron. So, in fact, that's actually got traces back to alchemical terms, where we have word phrases like crocus martis, which is means the saffron of Mars, which is a beautiful name for red iron oxide, which is Mars red, which I think is just a lovely name for it. Which brings me into the ochres and red iron oxide and yellow iron oxide. Ochres are like the naturally occurring like reds and yellows and stuff, earth paints that we use. And it's of course like one of the oldest, mark making materials that humans have used, like 40,000 years ago, maybe longer. Like one of the oldest human made marks was with red iron oxide. So we've been very familiar with it. There's a Egyptian myth about, it was Ra. Ra was getting old, and humans started laughing at him and making fun of him, and he got mad, as gods often do, and he was like, well, I'm going to destroy the human race. So he like summoned Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess, who was later the goddess of war and medicine, and she represented the flaming wrath of the sun. She came and landed, and she was just slaughtering people and just eating them and devouring them, and she was just going at it. And Ra was like, okay, y'all, Sekhmet, you need to, I'm good now, we've done it, I mean, they've got the point. And Sekhmet's like, I'm just getting started. So she's just continues to eat humanity to wipe them out. So Ra tells the priestesses of the temple to grind red ochre and mix it with beer and pour it upon the sands. And they do that. And Sekhmet's like, thinking its blood runs up to it, it's just lapping it up off the sands, and gets so wasted and like passes out and like wakes up and is like, whoa, okay, I'm not gonna kill anybody today. And so that was how humanity was saved, was through a bender. But like I was like, oh, beer, red iron oxide, like that is like an ink recipe. So like for a while I was making this special ink where it was like beer and red iron oxide, and I was calling it Sekhmet libation, and it was really cool. It made a really pretty color in writing. So that was like sort of like that's one sort of myth, and the other myth that's that utilizes also like touches upon what I was talking about earlier with sympathetic medicine. It's something known as the myth of Telephus. Telephus in the what was the one with Achilles? Was that the Odyssey? That wasn't the Odyssey. That was the Iliad. The Iliad. So and actually Telephus isn't in the Iliad either. He's in like another book that was sort of lost. That was part of that whole cycle. Telephus was wounded by Achilles' spear, and it festered and festered. Achilles, it turns out, wounded him by accident, but Telephus was in such pain he went to the oracle, and the oracle said, "The one who wounded you will heal you." So he goes to Achilles and said, "I was wounded by your spear." And Achilles scrapes the rust from his spear into his wound, and it heals. It affected healing. It was not unlike the powder of sympathy medicine that we were talking about earlier, but it's another sort of like homeopathic sort of thing. It's like take a little bit. What harmed you will heal you, which is sort of something that I think about when I'm working with my gun inks. It's like this is, in my mind, this is like a kind of medicine. This is like it is sort of like taking those qualities of like this sympathetic medicine and using it, like, you know, taking the weapon, the offending thing, and then using that as a way of healing. That's what I think anyway. So now we're gonna do some fun chemistry, okay?
Yeah.
All right, you guys have been really good listening to me this far. So the, Mars yellow. Mars yellow is a lot of Mars red, except it's hydrated, so it's yellow. Not a whole lot of history. Not a whole lot of exciting history going on with Mars yellow. Doesn't mean it's not a lovely pigment. So this is Mars black. Mars black is an interesting one. First, I'm going to do this chemical reaction so I get it right and I don't mess everything up. What we have here is iron sulfate that's been dissolved. It's sort of murky and muddy, but that's because it's got a little bit of rust from the gun in it. To it, we're going to add some hydrogen peroxide. So here we go. It hopefully won't gush out too much. So what we're doing is we're creating an oxygenated solution of iron sulfate. So we're sort of like bringing in the air to. Oh, and this was made with this. This is actually the Smith & Wesson in here. So fun fact. And so we're gonna let that do its work. I know this is a little bit slightly more dangerous part, but I don't think anyone out there is gonna get hurt. It'll only be me. So this is crystallized lye, and it is. It just gets really warm when you add it to water. So you sort of have to add it very carefully. In fact, it's already sort of started clumping up, so I'm going to use a little stick to poke it up. There we go. So I just add it a little bit at a time. Now, the key to this recipe is to have high temperature and high alkalineness, because that will form the black iron oxide that you want.
So like spring water is high alkali enough, or do you have? No, that's what the lye is doing.
Right. Yes. This is the king of caustics. Yeah. Is lye, and it's very powerful stuff. But you can get all this stuff over the counter. By the way, you know, everything I make, you can do this at home. You know, it's up to you whether you want to risk it. Oh man, it's not getting super hot. It's super hot. If it doesn't get hot, it might not make sense. Oh, that's where everything was. Okay, so this isn't going to explode or anything, he said. Okay, well that's great. That's where all the lye went. I don't usually use funnels. So, there's a little bit more. I'm going to add a little bit more. How y'all doing out there? Don't be nervous, it's fine. Okay. So this is like, oh yeah, it's getting nice and toasty now. I'm gonna try and get it all dissolved. Sometimes it likes to clump at the bottom. And now we're going to mix these together. A little bit here. A little bit of you, and it should make some big clumpy goop.
So is there actually like a ratio recipe that you follow, or?
Yes.
Okay.
No, I just sort of grab whatever. I do, actually I developed a recipe to do this, and I was very proud of myself because you can't really find, like, I don't know, they didn't have it on YouTube. So I started to figure it out myself.
Where does one get iron sulfate in the lye?
Iron sulfate is actually very common. You can get it as an iron supplement. In fact, it is iron supplements. It's one of the World Health Organization's #1 most needed medicines. You can also get it as a lawn conditioner. It makes your grass do something funny. We're gonna let this sort of like do its thing for a minute. And then I'm going to tell you about Mars Black. How is everybody doing? Am I talking too fast? Am I too excited? Okay, I don't want to make you guys
I'm
uncomfortable.
glad you covered why someone would stab someone and then heal them.
Yeah.
That was confusing
Well,
to me.
in case, yeah, it happens. So Mars Black, magnetite. It is the lodestone of antiquity. However, it was only used as a pigment recently with the development in the Industrial Revolution and like the development of the textile industry and the mass production of sulfuric acid that Mars Black was sort of made. Are there any questions? Yes.
What form was the Mars Black in that recorded the sound?
What form was it in?
Yeah, was it like a liquid? Was it in paint?
It was, the first time it was done, it was actually painted on paper. Because this was like before, well, I mean, I guess they still had celluloid, but like they were just using like regular old paper. And it was one of the reasons people didn't think it was going to last because the paper kept ripping when they were trying to record. Because it also has to go a lot faster than traditional tape. It had to go like a yard a second. So it was going really fast in recording sound. But yeah, it was just painted on a little strip of paper. In fact, the guy who was selected to do it, the reason he got the job was because he was made famous for making little gold tips of cigarette rolling papers. That's how he figured it out. So like they were like, that's the guy we need to talk to about this. Yeah, he was neat. He was German. He had a really big light bulb shaped head. He looked very sciencey. So, any other questions? Yes.
About the guns. So, how many have you messed with?
I've done at least 7 handguns, 1 shotgun, 1 assault rifle, and 2 bayonets. And I could be wrong about the 7 handguns. A lot of times I also get parts, so it's sort of like, you know, a mixed bag. But for the most part, I go and buy them at pawn shops, which is hilarious. The experiences I've had at pawn shops are really funny. Because they're like, what are you doing? Like, why are you buying all these guns? I'm like, I'm making ink. Like, okay, that's cool. You know, I'll just take it. It's funny, the place I usually go. I'm sorry, I'm rambling. Any other questions?
I have a follow-up. Can I have a follow-up?
Yes.
Okay, so do you, in terms of the magic,
Yes.
so when you're transforming the guns, do you know the story that you're transforming it into, or is there an intention in the magic of turning it into something else?
Well, so when it comes to like the magic part, as far as the way I see it is, it's one of those things where it's like, is this the product or is this an instrument that you can use in other magic? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I like to think of like at least doing like the heavy lifting of doing the transmutation of the gun into ink. Like the magic's been done, whatever happens after that, yes. You know, it can either enhance that magic or it can enhance that magic. You can write a grocery list with it, that's fine, that's cool. I mean, in a way, that's sort of magic too. Right. That's great. But my intention is solely to act as an agent of accelerated entropy. Yes. To rust things, yes. To like create, to push things further towards the earth. Like iron doesn't want to be a cold steel thing. It wants to rust. It wants to break down. It wants to become soil again. And like, if it can be art for a minute before it goes back to soil, because ultimately, let's not flatter ourselves. A lot of our drawings are going to turn into dirt. Yeah. And like, you know, the archives illusion, you know, you think you've got something special, you don't. It's going to turn into dirt. Everything's going to turn into dirt. So, you know, why not just, you know, like sort of like make it something fun and pretty for a minute rather than a gun you hurt somebody with. Yeah. Yes.
Where do some of these other ingredients come from, like the sulfuric acid or the lye or the gum arabic?
So the gum arabic, I try to be really specific because gum arabic is like one of the few things that actually is imported. So I try and get my gum arabic from, it's the Samburu tribe in Kenya, who they're like a fair trade gum arabic thing. There's also this really cool program where it's empowering women and young people to plant gum acacia trees on the border of Sahara to sort of prevent desert erosion. and also provide income because gum arabic is a sort of a good cash crop, or you can get a buck off of it. So that's something I kind of like to think about specifically. So I order that from I think it's actually through a guy in Canada who has a personal relationship with the Samburu folk. So that's that. That's a long answer for that one. Lye I get at the hardware store, and acid I get at the auto parts store. It's just battery acid. You can get it for like $17 over the counter. Yeah, like I say, everything's quite accessible to anyone who wants to try it. And I encourage people to turn guns into ink. It's fun. If you have a gun laying around and you want to turn into ink, or not even guns, but like nails, knives. I guess I hit a lot of nail folks out there tonight. Yes. So now we're going to talk about weird things. Unless there's more questions. But it's going to get stranger, and there might be more questions after this. The other part of my talk is I work with slime mold, Physarum polycephalum. And some of y'all might know what slime mold is. It's a organism that lives in wet, damp, shady woodlands. It's very bright yellow. Let me introduce you to my friend. Here he is. I grew this one just for this occasion. I can pass it around, or y'all can come up and I'll pass it around. Oh wow, he's gotten really crazy. So yeah, he kind of blew up. Some of y'all saw him earlier. He was only on this spot. It moves quite fast. It still doesn't have the Fruit Loopy smell yet, but I'm working on that. Y'all can pass that around. Don't eat it. It's not a lemon bar. It's a lot of lemon bars. So yeah, and if it's too gross, you don't even have to touch it. It is a slimy mold thing. Yes, so that's Physarum polycephalum. Physarum means slime, polycephalum means the many-headed. It is a really interesting organism. It's actually a giant amoeba, or a collection of amoebae within a single cell. It has been genetically determined to be at least nearly 1 billion years old, which is to say that before the differentiation of animals, plants, and fungi occurred, it was there. So it's funny because it has qualities of all three. So it has this wonderfully ancient, and it's just a fascinating organism. It's biologically immortal, which means it doesn't have senescence. I think that's the word. In other words, it doesn't naturally age and die. It will just go into another stage, another shape. Let's see, it has 780 sexes. I don't know how that works. But it's pretty crazy in there. It loves oatmeal.
More rice for you, Phil.
It's sort of like what I was calling it's charismatic microfauna. It's sort of like everyone's baby doll in the scientific realm. It's used as a model organism in a lot of things. It exhibits seemingly intelligent behavior. It's used to solve the shortest distance problems, the traveling salesman problem, solves mazes. It has this way of creating networks that are the most efficient. So it has this sort of interesting, it's like a living algorithm. So I was I make all this stuff. I make zinc, and I'm like, what is a noble use of the ink? What is really something that I want to do as an artist? What is worth making? I always feel like art is sort of so easily turned into commodity. If you're an artist oh yeah, ideally you're supposed to sell something and eventually it'll sell for something more and it'll sell for something more until it's like a stock option, it's being traded publicly or something like that. I mean, and that's even sort of supposed to be the ideal. I mean, I know there's other ways to enjoy art and live with art, but like, I always am afraid of that. I feel like that's, I don't want to be an instrument to make someone wealthier. So I'm like, well, what is like the most meaningful like way to do stuff? Because like, and also like without imposing, the other thing is like, without imposing my ego on it. Like, what is a way that I can like create without like just sort of putting myself all up on it? So I was like, oh, what if there was like some sort of organism I could like communicate with? Like, what if I used my ink as a medium for communication with something that's like, bigger than me, or older than me, or like this sort of like fascinating creature? And I sort of like, I came across, well, really what I was thinking about is how do I communicate with aliens? But like, I came across slime mold, and I was like, well, this is the closest I'm gonna get. And I was like, okay, well, neat. So I'm gonna like, I want to learn all about it. I happened to be I was watching PBS. It was a Nova episode. This is no, like, I know, I wish it came to me in like some sort of revelation or a dream, but I was watching TV. And like, it was there, and they were talking about all this amazing stuff, and I was like, I knew in the back of my mind slime mold was pretty cool, but I was like, wow, that's really neat. And it just ran the other night, and it was growing on a stump on the swamp, and I was like, that's really neat, I'm gonna do it. So I took a little bit, I put it on some oatmeal, and it's been amazing 3 years since then. It's grown. I've made like probably a kiddie pool's worth of slime mold. I didn't make it, I fed it, and it grew, and it grew, and it doubles in size every day, so it'll grow, and it's remarkably fast. It's about a centimeter an hour. It's very quick, so you gotta stay on top of it. You think everything's fine, and then it's oozing out of the Tupperware container. That was my life for like a while, and then I realized it could dry, and it could be like reanimated later, so I didn't have to keep making all this oatmeal. I had so many containers of oatmeal in my studio, it was frightening. Like, I was worried people, if they saw it, they would think I was losing my mind, because I was like, why are you saving all this rotting oatmeal in Tupperware containers? I'm like, it's the yellow friend, it's the yellow creature. Well, so in researching it, I was like, of course, since I'm a pigment person, I'm like, well, I wonder if there's anything I can do with pigments. Lo and behold, of course, one of the only pigments that really tracks really well is iron oxide, which makes sense since there's iron oxide all over the world. If most of the dirt is iron oxide, like ochre. So I was like, well, I wonder. I'm going to feed it some of my gun red iron oxide, and I was like, how do I do that? I'll mix it in with oatmeal because it loves oatmeal. So I'd make this gruel with like red powdered gun, and it was like gory and nasty and so cool. And like I took it and I could make a little ball, and I put it in like the middle of an ink blot. I forgot about the ink blot. I made ink blots. Okay, so let's back up a little bit. So the ink blot, in reading about the slime mold, there's certain herbs that are known as chemotactic elements that influence the behavior of the slime mold. The slime mold typically is very attracted to valerian root, which is an interesting thing. It actually will most populations will even be fatally attracted to it, to where they'll hang out with the valerian root until it dies, even with food nearby. It's just so interested in the valerian root. I thought that was interesting. I was going to use it as a way to like manipulate the slime mold that I had. But lo and behold, I have an anomalous population, which is repulsed by slime mold and does not want to get near it. So this is a good time for the visual aid. So what I did was I'd make an ink blot, and with black iron oxide, this stuff, doped with valerian root extract, to do this. And then this is really, I'm sorry, the light's weird. If y'all want to come up and look at it too, or I can test it out. Maybe
I've seen it on Instagram.
You've seen it on Instagram. I'm big on Instagram, y'all. So what happens is it fills the interior of the ink blot to the limit, because it'll stop where the valerian root is. And it's sort of just, oh, you guys are in a terrible spot. And this will be like, also I'll have, this is on a loop up here.
Yeah.
So it fills up the ink blot and then determines the route out in this like sort of singular artery. Actually, you can pass this. Don't look at my form. But yeah, so it's like moving around and it determines this route. And I was like so obsessed with this. I was like making hundreds of these, which is one of the reasons why I held that oatmeal in my studio. So this is some, I'll pass these around too. So these are like some of the finished examples. So this, the red is the red iron oxide from the gun. The black is the black iron oxide from the gun, doped with valerian root. And you guys can just sort of see what's going on. But they would move around, they would sort of fill up the ink blot and then determine their way out. And like, it was sort of this moment when I was working with them, I was like, this is like this sort of like, it's this dialogue of form where like, there's this organism that's interpreting this ink blot and then making this like informed decision on how to leave it. It was like this sort of like a question, like a prompt, and then like an answer or like a response. And like, it was sort of like mind-blowing, and I was like, there's some sort of dialogue that's going on here between me and the slime mold, but I can't interpret what it is. And I just felt like what I was doing was somehow mystical, and like I was making some sort of like huge breakthrough, and I still don't know what I did or what was going on. But I feel like it's important, and I made them, and now you guys can see them, and I'm sharing them. But yeah, so that's what I did with slime mold. Okay, I think that's it. I think I'm done. Yeah. Do you guys have any more questions? Oh, right. Oh, yes. Okay, cool. I gotta put it in the light. Can y'all see a clear layer of water over that? All right. Let's see if it works. Did it move?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So yeah, this is the magnetic pigment. This is magnetized. So we can make fake dollar bills, y'all! Only 5s and 20s, I think, yes, so there's your magnetized. Okay, now.
Is that ink then? What? I don't understand. That's ink, is it? You just made
well, yes. So this is a black pigment. I just made this black pigment. Ours black. So I just have to wash the pigment to get the sodium sulfate out. Sodium sulfate is the byproduct of it. Sodium sulfate is commonly used in, it's like the majority of laundry detergent. It's an unfortunate chemical that's part of the process, but at the same time it's also one that's so highly prevalent in the world that, you know, I don't know, this little bit might not be so bad. Sometimes you get your hands dirty, folks, that's all I'm saying. You know. Did anybody want to see and did not see any slime action time-lapse stuff? Okay.
So in these painted, drawn, whatever they are,
Artifacts.
art.
A chiropoedia. Art made without human hands.
Where is the valerian?
The valerian is in the black.
Okay.
It's doped in the black ink.
And then the slime mold is carrying the red ink with it.
There's some evidence that the slime mold actually likes the red ink because its iron is like a micronutrient for it. So it's sort of like it's a little bit of a nutrition thing, but in the amount of red iron oxide put in it doesn't need that much, so it'll just track it around and like leave it. Usually in the consolidated sort of superhighway artery that it makes, because there's so much movement going on there. That's where it deposits most of its waste. So none of these actually have slime mold on them, y'all. There's no slime mold was harmed in the making of this. This is all just their mucus trails and pigment. And this is something I wanted to, oh yeah, this was the big connector. Oh man, hold on. So, ink is a fluid that is an extension of our body that we use to create external memory. This is a fluid that's used as extended memory for the slime mold, because slime mold won't go where it once was. So it's sort of creating its own ink. It's sort of like its own external memory. Like that's how it operates, that's how it behaves. So we're not so different, us and the slime mold. And that was a wraparound, anyway.
Yeah.
Forgot about that part. Thank you. Yes. Anyone
I
has
feel a little bit like we haven't quite had the money shot. How do you make the ink? So you've got this this thing here.
Yes.
So like, can you explain that process? Like,
The ink?
yeah, like how do you make? So we've got this thing. You say you wash the sulfur out of it.
You wash the
How
sodium
do you do
sulfate.
that? Like, what?
Well, so you add water and then you let it, it's called levigation. And so it settles down and then you pour off the top and then you add more water and you let it settle down and then you pour off that and you go that back and forth until the water is not alkali anymore. And then you take the pigment, you dry it out, and then you can use it as a watercolor, a printing ink, you can mix with oils, things like that.
When does the sumac and ganache come into it?
See, this is a different kind of ink.
Ah.
This is the galotannate of iron ink. So while this is black, it's a writing ink. It won't be used as a printing ink because it's so thin, and also because it's a chemically reactive ink. So it'll only behave like in the specific context of using a dip pen or something along those lines. So different inks. Don't think of this as ink. Think of this as
Toner.
yeah. Actually, you're absolutely right, Phil. Black iron oxide is used as a toner. MIRC, magnetic image recording something. It's in Xeroxes, and because of the very magnetic qualities is what puts it on the paper. Thanks, Phil. That's a good one.
Paying attention.
You're doing a good job. You get an A. So yeah, it is like toner. But also just think of it as like a pigment, a solid. Whereas this is a fluid that can be like, that's reactive. Is that in more?
So that becomes this?
No. This has become what it is.
That's it.
That's it.
Once you wash that's toner.
Well, it's cool.
Or paint.
I mean, it's magnetic.
So, so how do you make this? What's the difference here?
So this I make with iron. I mix this a solution of iron sulfate
Right.
with a tea of sumac. I didn't
Right.
really do it, did I? So yeah, you boil this. You make a tea, a strong tea. You dissolve this in water. You dissolve the gum in water. You mix them all together, and it becomes
Okay.
iron.
So there's
ink,
no
iron ink.
acid process in this ink?
The only acid process is in dissolving the gun,
Right, gotcha.
and then you get the iron sulfate. But after that, there's no acid
Right,
processes.
there's no lye or whatever.
No, that's the special guy.
Interesting. So which one are you using on the?
These are the magnet. Yeah. So actually, let's see. This is gonna be a very small reaction, but it might move. You guys won't believe me. A little bit. So it's a magnetic ink. So this is the magnetic.
She's a witch.
You guys are like, you're just blowing on it or something. You're not really making a move. But it is, trust me.
Could you do that with, like, paint that is Mars black? Could you put a magnet
Yeah.
on a painting that has Mars black paint and that would?
Yeah, if it's true Mars Black, if you get Mars Black at an artist store, if it's not magnetic, it's not Mars Black. So you can take a magnet to an art supply store, you see Mars Black, and if it's magnetic, then you know it's the real deal. Otherwise, you're just getting ripped off. Big paint, they don't want you to know.
So if we went to the Dali Museum, loaded with magnets, we would you could. If you had a strong enough magnet and you were near a dark enough Dali painting, you could, in theory, get away with a crime heist of the century.
And no one would probably notice.
Don't
could say I'm an art magnate. Good night.
Yeah.
Yes. So y'all can, yeah.
I have an unrelated question. So at some point, you were doing stuff with Mother of Kombucha.
That's true.
And I don't want to
was.
open a whole can of worms, but I want to know what you were doing with the Mother of Kombucha.
The mother of kombucha. So when I was really into my like microbial world, I was investigating kombucha because, as a lot of you may know, kombucha is the pellicle that grows on top, or the SCOBY, the mother of kombucha, aka the SCOBY, which is not quite entirely accurate. The best thing to call it is the pellicle. So the pellicle that's on top of the SCOBY, or the kombucha, is a mat of microbial cellulose. And cellulose is paper, or wood, or whatever. But it's just spun in such a delicate way, a little knit way, that it seems to behave differently. So I was taking large scobies and I was drying them out and making sort of like a vegan parchment, and then illustrating on them. And I grew some slime mold on it, and I was thinking like, I'm gonna make like, I was feeling really Frankenstein-y. I was like, I'm gonna put like little veins and like it's gonna be flesh and it's gonna come to life. But it got really funky and weird. But it was a noble effort, and I'm not entirely sure I've given up on it yet. But I've got to find a good, solid kombucha. The thing is, I told myself, with the stacks of rotting oatmeal behind me, you cannot have kombucha and slime mold. You can have one or the other. You cannot have both. So it was the slime mold, and the kombucha had to go. So it was oatmeal over tea. Yes.
Can you talk more about your attempts to communicate with alien life forms and what that means for your art?
Well, I'm not communicating with any alien life forms, but what I consider this is I'm enrolled in a program of being able to develop some sort of interface to interact with something that is intelligent, but not necessarily, but not human, or symbol making or sign making. It's sort of like, I think it's sort of like it's what was the word? Xeno. I forgot the word meant, but like, wow, my mind just totally emptied out. It's sort of. It's training. What I'm doing is, what I think of it is like training, like because like we assume we're always going to expect, like I don't think aliens are going to be like bipedal things. I think they're actually going to be like organisms that like defy our very existence, or our very idea of what something outside. I mean, it's just not Star Trek. It's like there's going to be strange organisms that are sentient. Have you seen Arrival?
I was thinking about that movie.
Yes. I mean, that movie was really cool because it was like.
He looked like slime mold.
I mean, yeah. I was like, after I watched that movie, I was like, oh my god, I should have been on that. I should have been on that production crew or whatever. Because first of all, will we even be able to, what will be the mode of communication, and also what will be the effect of learning that language? Like, and that movie did a really amazing job of like saying like, well, language is also like, can alter your reality. And, I feel like me working with slime mold sort of altered my reality a lot. I do feel sort of like dilated to this idea of like being able to move, like, what it's like to sort of go through two doors at the same time. Like, it's easy when you solve a maze if you can go everywhere at once. And like, sort of like being able to hold all that in your mind is really sort of a fascinating little thought experiment that my poor little ape brain is not quite set up to do. But maybe I don't need a brain at all. Slime mold doesn't have a brain. Yes?
Well, to follow up on that, you used the words symbols and signs a moment ago. Can you talk about what you think those words mean when symbols and signs are being made by non-human actors?
Symbols or signs are made by non-human actors. Well, I would wonder, I don't know. So, I would have to know that they're creating something that signifies something else. And if I don't have a basis of communication between us at all, then there wouldn't be any way for me to determine whether that was a symbol or anything. Are you satisfied with that answer?
Well, I mean, sure. I mean, it seems like that's in a way the heart of what's most interesting about this art. No?
Uh-huh. Yeah. Like, well, I know. I'm dancing in the dark. You know, that's what it is. I'm dancing in the dark with them, but I'm hoping that something will come out of it than what I currently understand. So, you know, maybe somebody here will see them and recognize something that they're saying to me. Like, more oatmeal.
So, just on another level of your life as an artist. So, for a lot of artists, there's the what some would call the hustle of doing the work, the creative work, with trying to, you know, put food on the table or pay rent. You know, you have a very specific art form. What does that look like for you?
Well, so I have two wings of the business. I make ink. I'm an ink manufacturer. That's always been my bread and butter. And honestly, sometimes it's like I don't have time to even think about art because I'm making ink a lot, which is good. And sometimes I think like maybe, you know, I should think of my business as an art form. Like, you know, I'm like, who makes ink? Really? Like, you know, like it's sort of strange enough to maybe be its own interesting little performance piece. But yeah, mostly I feed myself through ink sales. And occasionally when I get the what's it called? The muse, the feeling, the push, the shove to make art, I'll sell that too. I'll sell it.
Those prints are beautiful that you saw on Instagram. They're gorgeous.
The prints, yeah, I like prints a lot. They're fun. And like, but you know, I was about to say was like, they're fun, they're easy to make, I could knock them out, I could sell them, you know, and then I'm like, you sound like a turd, Thomas. Because like, it just doesn't sound, I mean, it's true, and it's important for artists to be able to live and eat and be able to make those things, but it's almost like in my mind I've gone to this point where I'm like thinking about like I'm just like a little factory. That's all I am. I'm just a little factory. Like, and one of the things that I wanted to experience here at the residency was like, okay, this is it. I got space, I got time, I'm gonna get inspired, I'm gonna paint this beautiful, like soulful, like piece, and it's gonna be amazing. And like I'm sitting back and I'm like, man, I should just like make more ink, probably. And I'm like, huh, well, I guess this is, you know, this is sort of part of my thing now. Yeah, you know, I don't know. It's hard to gauge when things hit you. And like being able to have like the creative discipline too.
This thing that occurs to me is that you're now constricted in some ways by being mobile, but also expanding. You know, you don't have the same kind of access to space to like carry around equipment, but you're moving into different spaces, which may have opportunities that you wouldn't have with your standard equipment in your standard space. I hope so, anyway. I mean,
yeah.
I'm real aware of the relationship between space and your ability to move forward as an artist.
Yeah.
So.
I know, I didn't like, because, oh yeah, if you guys don't know, I have a van that I drive around in now. That's sort of outfitted as a mobile lab / studio. That's sort of what Phil's referring to. And I've actually thought like, okay, well, you know, I'm gonna make tiny art now. Like this is what my new thing is. Like I have to scale down and figure out what I'm gonna be making. And I was like, I'm just gonna write pretty little letters to send everybody, and it's only gonna cost a stamp, and I'm gonna be like, part of the whole thing is like, part of the art process is it has to go through the mail and get squished and inked and weird. Just trying to imagine like, you know, what the creative process will be like on a smaller scale and on an affordable scale. Because, you know, the thing about making art in a van is like if you make like some beautiful, delicate sculpture, you gotta carry all the shipping around with you too to pack that up. So I was like, no, I want to make something that can slip in the mailbox and it's gone.
I really enjoy your ability to see the metaphor and symbolism in what you do. Like I suspect there is in what I do, but I'm completely blind to it. And it's really, it's very entertaining to watch you make those connections.
I think we have time for one more question.
Okay.
Okay.
Earlier, you had alluded to art,
Mm-hmm.
and I was wondering, did we cover it, or was there more to what you were gonna get to?
Well, I sort of covered it in like the fact that like I struggle with the idea of what it means to be an artist. Like what I make. If what I'm making is something that's going to later on be commodified into it's going to become something I don't want it to be. It's going to make the wealthy wealthier. Like what can I make that's still important to me? Like being creative and like what satisfies me in that way, without necessarily venturing into like that territory of just becoming a commodity maker. And artist, and also like it sort of touches back on like the idea of like I want to make I want to raise awareness, I want to start a dialogue like that. Just drives me crazy because I'm like that's like I get it, like in some instances it's like yeah, that's important, like okay, if there's something you can't actually physically do, then yeah, I understand that. Like you can't, like what?
I just love you going.
Okay, like save the whales. Like oh yeah, okay, like you're not gonna go out there and like blow up all the whaling boats or whatever.
Yeah.
So like yeah, you can make art about saving the whales. That's cool. But like I feel like in a way like guns being accessible as they are in America, like it would be so easy. And I'm all about teaching somebody how to dismantle a gun and turning it into a pigment or anything. Seize initiative, seize control. Like make your art an engine for good, and make it something that will like dissolve and like change like the state, the state, like the system of control, of fear that's over us, like decimate it with like the power of like chemistry. Yeah. Did that answer your question?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.